My name is Regina Brooks, and at 32, I had spent over a decade building a reputation as Fargo's premier event planner. I didn't just plan events, I orchestrated experiences, turning chaos into perfection. Weddings, corporate galas, birthdays, even the occasional high-profile fundraiser, I did them all. Each event was a reflection of my dedication, my creativity, my blood, sweat, and tears. And for years, I had poured that same love into my family, especially my younger brother, Randall. I had been there for every milestone, every big moment. I had stayed up nights agonizing over every detail, making sure he and his future fiancée would have a party that people would talk about for years. I had booked the venues, negotiated with caterers, hired the best decorators, and even covered costs out of my own pocket when the budget ran thin. I had done it all silently, expecting nothing in return but the satisfaction of seeing my brother happy. So when Monday morning arrived and my phone buzzed with a text from Randall, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw my phone across my office. The message was short, sharp, and devastating. "You're not invited to my engagement party. You don't fit with our VIP guests." I stared at it, frozen. My hands shook as if the words had physically struck me. My chest tightened. I read it again and again. No typo, no cruel joke, just cold, deliberate betrayal. All the late nights I had spent booking the sleek downtown venue, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, securing the catering team led by Mrs. Pierce, with her herb-crusted lamb and artisanal desserts, hiring Corey Ramsey to design floral arches that would steal breaths. It all meant nothing. My hours of negotiation, my sleepless nights, the money I had poured into every single detail, completely erased with a single text. I could have screamed. I could have called him a selfish little brat. I could have demanded an explanation. But instead, I did something far more satisfying. I smiled. A quiet, almost imperceptible grin tugged at my lips. I felt a thrill, not of joy, but of anticipation. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just packed my bags, booked a flight to Aspen, and walked away. Let him handle his precious party without me. Let him see what happened when the person who truly cared wasn't there to manage the chaos. As I sat on the plane, watching the clouds drift by, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just about the party. This was about respect. This was about being valued as a sister, as a professional, as someone who had dedicated so much of herself to others. Randall didn't just ignore my efforts, he dismissed them entirely. And now he would have to face the consequences. By the time I landed in Aspen, I felt lighter, almost liberated. The crisp mountain air greeted me, and for the first time in months, I felt free of anger, free of frustration, free of the invisible chains I had carried for so long. Aspen was a new beginning, not just a physical escape, but an emotional one. Here, I would focus on myself, my work, my future. But as fate would have it, I didn't have to wait long to see the results of my absence. Within a week, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Texts, calls, frantic messages from friends, family, and even strangers who had attended the party. My brother's perfect engagement night had crashed spectacularly. The floral arrangements arrived late, or in some cases, never at all. The caterers mixed up the menu. The venue had double-booked part of the space, leaving guests confused and disgruntled. The VIPs he had insisted on impressing were unimpressed, frustrated, and unimpressed. And Randall? He was panicked, overwhelmed, and completely unprepared. I didn't reach out, I didn't gloat. I simply watched from a distance, savoring the sweet irony. After years of dedication, he had finally learned a lesson in humility, and it was coming from the one person he had taken for granted. That was just the beginning. Something bigger was coming, something that would not just embarrass him, but completely flip his world upside down. The more I thought about it, the more exhilarating it became. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense. This was proving my worth, my power, my value in a way he could not ignore. I spent the week in Aspen, settling into a small, charming condo overlooking the snow-dusted mountains. The view was serene, almost therapeutic. I had my laptop, my phone, and my planner notebooks, and slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that wasn't just about Randall's downfall, it was about my rise, about showing the world, and especially my brother, that Regina Brooks was not to be underestimated. Evenings were spent walking the Aspen streets, sipping hot chocolate from a local cafe, and sketching ideas for events that were bigger, bolder, and more spectacular than anything I had ever done. I reminded myself of every event I had mastered in Fargo, every challenge I had overcome, every client who had trusted me with their dreams. And I knew I would never, ever let someone undervalue me again. Meanwhile, Randall's frantic calls continued to pile up. He begged for advice, for help, for guidance, calls I let go unanswered. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a mix of amusement and satisfaction. He had thought he could exclude me, belittle me, and everything would still go perfectly. He was wrong, and he would realize just how wrong, in ways he couldn't even imagine. By the end of the week, the news had spread beyond family circles. Social media posts, murmurs among friends, even strangers talking about the party's failure, all pointed to the absence of the one person who had been the backbone of every successful event Randall had ever had. And yet, no one knew why I hadn't been there. The mystery added to my rising legend. Regina Brooks, the woman who made everything perfect when present and whose absence made chaos inevitable. As I looked out over the Aspen skyline, snow glinting under the streetlights, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. This was only the beginning. Randall might think he had won by excluding me, but he had no idea what was coming next. And when the time came, he would remember this moment forever. He would remember the sister he had dismissed, the event planner he had taken for granted, the woman who had walked away, but was never gone from his life entirely. Because in the end, Regina Brooks doesn't just survive betrayal. Regina Brooks thrives on it. And this was just the first chapter of the reckoning. The plane touched down on the snowy runway of Aspen, and I felt a rush of relief I hadn't experienced in years. The crisp mountain air hit my face like a cleansing wave, sharp and invigorating. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt untethered, free from the chaos that my brother's betrayal had left behind. Fargo, my office, my relentless schedule, all of it faded into the background. Here I could think. Here I could breathe. Here I could plan for myself. I dragged my suitcase through the terminal, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Aspen was beautiful, impossibly so. Snow-dusted pines lined the streets, twinkling lights reflected off the ice-slick sidewalks, and the smell of fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans floated in the air. It felt like stepping into another world, one where Randall's petty games couldn't reach me. My condo was modest but cozy, perched on a hill with a balcony overlooking the valley below. From here, I could see the faint glow of distant hotels, their lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. I dropped my suitcase and sank onto the sofa, letting the silence wash over me. For the first time, I felt in control of my own life. I knew I couldn't just sit here forever. I was Regina Brooks, after all, the woman who could turn chaos into perfection. My mind started racing, thinking about opportunities. Aspen wasn't just a retreat. It was a playground of possibilities. High-profile clients, luxury events, celebrities seeking a meticulous planner. The city was a gold mine, and I was just getting started. The next morning, I ventured out. Snow crunched under my boots as I wandered the streets, taking in the boutiques, cafes, and galleries. Everything seemed alive, vibrant, and full of potential. I stopped at a small coffee shop tucked between a ski gear store and a boutique hotel. The barista, a young man with bright blue eyes, greeted me warmly. I ordered a cappuccino and found a corner table with a view of the street. I opened my laptop and began drafting ideas. I sketched layouts, menus, lighting plans, and themes for events I could pitch to local businesses. The energy here was different. People weren't stuck in the small town mindset of Fargo. They wanted elegance, drama, innovation, and I was ready to deliver it. By the second week, I had made connections with several local vendors, caterers, florists, lighting experts, and even a few boutique hotel managers. Everyone I met seemed eager to work with someone as ambitious and skilled as I was. I could feel my confidence building with every conversation, every handshake, every nod of approval. It was during a casual networking brunch that I first met Claire Fontaine, a high-profile event organizer in Aspen. She was elegant, poised, and intimidating, the kind of woman whose presence demanded attention. We struck up a conversation about luxury weddings, corporate retreats, and gala events. I shared my portfolio discreetly, careful not to seem boastful, but confident enough to let my work speak for itself. Claire's eyebrows rose as she flipped through my digital portfolio. "You've done all this in Fargo?" she asked, genuinely impressed. "Yes," I said, smiling. "Fargo might not have the luxury scene of Aspen, but I've made it work. Every event was a challenge, and I loved every minute of it." She leaned back, studying me. "I like your style. Ambitious, meticulous, creative. I have a winter gala coming up for some Aspen elites. If you're interested, you might want to consider it." My heart skipped. This was it, the opportunity I needed. "I'd be honored," I said, keeping my voice calm, though inside I was buzzing with excitement. Within days, I was thrown into the whirlwind of planning my first big Aspen event. The gala was set at a luxurious lodge on the mountainside with panoramic views of the snow-capped peaks. The client wanted drama, elegance, and uniqueness. I delivered all three. I handpicked every detail: the ice sculptures that sparkled under strategically placed lights, the catering team that offered a fusion of French and Alpine cuisine, and the floral arrangements that captured winter's beauty in every petal. I coordinated live music, lighting effects, and a seamless schedule that made the evening flow effortlessly. My planner notebook became a Bible, each page filled with meticulous notes, sketches, and timelines. On the night of the gala, I stood back and watched the event unfold. Guests arrived in long evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, their eyes widening as they took in the ice chandelier, the cascading floral arrangements, and the perfectly lit stage. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, chatter, and admiration. I moved among the crowd, calm and composed, absorbing compliments with a graceful smile. And yet, I couldn't help but think about Fargo, about Randall, about his so-called perfect engagement party, which I had wisely skipped. A small, private satisfaction coursed through me as I imagined the chaos he must have endured, the guests confused, the catering mismanaged, the decorations missing, or worse, falling apart. I had chosen to step back, to let him face the consequences of his arrogance, and it had been delicious. The gala was a resounding success. Social media buzzed with photos and praise, hashtags like #AspenElegance and #WinterWonderGala spreading across platforms. The event was written up in a few local magazines, and I could see my name gaining recognition beyond Fargo. For the first time, I felt what it meant to build my reputation on my own terms, without relying on family or old connections. In the days that followed, clients began reaching out to me directly. Aspen residents and businesses wanted the Fargo planner who had transformed the Winter Gala. Invitations to collaborate on luxury weddings, corporate events, and private parties started flooding my inbox. Each email, each call, each inquiry was a reminder that I was more than Randall's sister. I was Regina Brooks, a force to be reckoned with talent that extended far beyond the borders of North Dakota. And yet, even as I thrived, The thought of Randall lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't ignore it entirely, not when the text that had started all this still burned in my memory. "You don't fit with our VIP guests." I smiled at the irony. Here I was, building a network of real VIPs, impressing people who truly mattered, and he was still struggling with the consequences of his poor decisions. His world was unraveling while mine was expanding. It was poetic, in a way. By the end of the month, I had cemented my foothold in Aspen. I had a team of local vendors ready to collaborate, a portfolio that impressed even the most discerning clients, and a renewed sense of purpose. But more importantly, I had a plan forming in my mind. A plan that would not just show Randall my worth, but make him regret underestimating me. I didn't need to confront him directly. Not yet. My rise, my success, and the whispers of my accomplishments were already speaking louder than words ever could. And when the moment came, he would see that the sister he had dismissed had become something unstoppable. As I stood on the balcony of my Aspen condo one evening, the sun setting behind the snow-capped mountains, I let the wind whip my hair around my face. I inhaled deeply, savoring the chill, the freedom, and the thrill of possibility. Randall had made a mistake, one that would echo far beyond Fargo. Because Regina Brooks doesn't just escape betrayal, Regina Brooks uses it. She thrives on it. And Aspen, with all its elegance, opportunity, and high-stakes glamour, was just the beginning of her ascent. The snowflakes danced around me, and I knew one thing for certain. This was only the start. By the time February rolled in, Aspen was glimmering under layers of fresh snow, and I had firmly established myself as more than just a visitor. I was a player in this city's elite event scene. The Winter Gala had opened doors I hadn't even known existed, and invitations for collaborations, weddings, corporate retreats, and exclusive parties flooded my inbox. And yet, amidst the thrill of new beginnings, Randall loomed in the back of my mind. Not because I missed him, far from it, but because the betrayal still stung, and the desire to remind him of my worth burned hotter with each passing day. I didn't want to attack him outright. That was too obvious, too petty. I wanted my success, my skill, and my brilliance to speak for themselves, and I wanted him to watch, helpless, as his ego crumbled in the shadow of my accomplishments. I began carefully weaving my strategy. It wasn't enough that I excelled. The story of my excellence had to reach him, subtly, irresistibly. I would use his arrogance against him. The first step was visibility. I posted updates about my Aspen projects on social media, not brags, but carefully curated snapshots that highlighted my creativity, attention to detail, and ability to transform spaces into unforgettable experiences. Photos of the Winter Gala went viral within Aspen circles, the crystal ice chandeliers reflecting the soft light of the lodge, floral arrangements that looked like frozen waterfalls, menus that married elegance with innovation. Comments poured in. "Who's this planner from Fargo? She turned the lodge into a dream world." "Regina Brooks is a genius." I smiled privately at each message, knowing the news would reach Fargo eventually. Randall didn't live in isolation. Whispers of my successes traveled fast. I imagined his frustration, a knot of anger and disbelief forming every time he heard about me, and I was content letting that knot tighten. The second step was positioning. I began to network aggressively within Aspen's circles. I attended charity events, art exhibits, boutique hotel openings, any venue where influential clients gathered. I introduced myself with ease, charm, and professionalism, letting my reputation precede me without ever mentioning Fargo. People were drawn to my confidence, my eye for detail, and the way I seemed to anticipate their every need before they even voiced it. One evening, at an exclusive ski lodge opening, I met Simon Keller, a luxury wedding planner known across the country. He was critical, precise, and notoriously hard to impress. As he spoke about trends, guest management, and high-profile clients, I listened, nodding thoughtfully, then casually shared anecdotes from past events, challenges I had overcome, crises I had averted, and moments where creativity had saved the day. He raised an eyebrow. "You've done all this alone?" "Yes," I said. "Every event a test, every detail a responsibility I couldn't hand off. It taught me patience, precision, and the art of anticipating the unexpected." Simon's smile was faint but approving. "I'd like to collaborate with you. There's a gala next month for some tech executives from New York. If you're interested." I accepted without hesitation. Another opportunity, another step toward cementing my Aspen reputation, and another way to ensure Randall would hear about my rising influence. While I focused on building this new world, I didn't ignore the personal element of my plan. I began tracking Randall's moves indirectly, through family updates, social media, and occasional discreet messages from mutual friends. He was floundering. His engagement party had been a disaster, and the fallout lingered. Vendors complained about mismanagement, guests whispered about the chaos, and his fiancée, though tactful, was frustrated beyond measure. The more I learned, the more delicious the irony became. He had thought excluding me would make him look independent, sophisticated, and in control. Instead, it had exposed him as inept, unprepared, and entirely reliant on the one person he had pushed away. I didn't rub it in. Not yet. Patience was key. My ultimate satisfaction would come not from confrontation, but from seeing the inevitable recognition of my value in his eyes and in the eyes of everyone around him. In the meantime, I kept my schedule packed. Every day in Aspen was a lesson, a networking opportunity, or a chance to innovate. I experimented with lighting designs that played with shadows and reflections, crafted menus that blended regional flavors with haute cuisine, and explored ways to make every event unique. I was no longer just an event planner. I was a creator of experiences, a woman whose touch transformed ordinary moments into memories that lingered forever. The nights were quiet, and I often spent hours on my balcony overlooking the valley. The stars above Aspen were sharp and brilliant, as if mocking the dim lights of Fargo. I allowed myself moments of reflection, thinking about my journey, the betrayal, and the excitement of what was coming next. I was no longer angry, not really. I was strategic. I was focused. I was preparing to strike in the only way that mattered, by proving, irrefutably, that Randall had made a mistake he would never forget. Weeks passed, and the whispers of my success began to circulate beyond Aspen. Social media posts from gala attendees, magazine features, and word of mouth created a buzz I hadn't even expected. I became known as the Fargo planner who conquered Aspen, a phrase that carried both admiration and envy. And somewhere in the mix, I knew, Randall heard it. The third step of my plan was subtle escalation. I decided to organize a charity winter ball, a high-profile, invite-only event designed to attract the city's elite, including some contacts I knew Randall would care about. The goal wasn't just to impress clients or build my portfolio. The goal was to demonstrate my genius in a way that would eventually reach him. I handpicked every detail, from the snowflake-themed decor to the lighting that made the ballroom shimmer like an icy palace. The catering was flawless, the entertainment sophisticated, and the guest list exclusive. I coordinated each element meticulously, ensuring the night would be memorable and talked about for months. As RSVPs rolled in, I felt the thrill of anticipation. This was more than an event. It was a statement. And when word inevitably reached Fargo, Randall would see that I hadn't just survived without him. I had thrived. I had conquered. I had turned his betrayal into fuel for my success. One evening, as I reviewed the seating charts and finalized the menu, I received a text from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. "Regina, I heard about your Aspen events. They're incredible. I'd love to collaborate. I smiled. Step 3 was in motion. Step 4, making sure Randall witnessed my ascent, without me lifting a finger to confront him, was already forming in my mind. This wasn't just revenge, this was mastery, subtle and powerful, and I couldn't wait to see the moment he realized the sister he had dismissed had become untouchable. By the time the snow softened and Aspen's icy streets shimmered under the late winter sun, my plan was clear. I wasn't just planning events anymore, I was planning a demonstration of value, brilliance, and dominance. And Randall would watch it all unfold, powerless to intervene. Because Regina Brooks didn't just survive betrayal, she thrived on it. And Aspen was only the beginning. Spring had arrived in Aspen, though the snow still clung stubbornly to the mountaintops, sparkling under the crisp sunlight. My reputation in the city had grown faster than I ever expected. Word of mouth, social media posts, and my meticulously executed events had positioned me as the go-to planner for high-profile galas and exclusive gatherings. But it wasn't just about Aspen anymore. It was about Fargo, about Randall, and the inevitable reckoning he would face. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A family friend reached out discreetly, saying Randall had just taken on a massive new project, a corporate launch event combined with a pre-wedding celebration for him and his fiancée. He was drowning in logistics, frustrated with vendors, and desperate for guidance. The friend's tone was almost apologetic as they added, "I think he might finally realize he needs you." I smiled faintly. Timing, I reminded myself, was everything. I didn't rush back to Fargo. Not yet. My strategy wasn't confrontation, it was demonstration. I would let Randall scramble while I prepared my own return, not as a supplicant, but as a force of nature. Yet when I received a direct call from him, his desperation unmistakable, I knew the moment had arrived. "Regina," he said, his voice tight, almost pleading. I need your help. Everything is falling apart. Please, can you come?" I leaned back in my Aspen condo chair, letting the silence stretch. His tone, a mixture of panic and guilt, was intoxicating in its validation. "I'll consider it," I replied, deliberately neutral. "But it won't be easy." He didn't push. That was the first small victory. He was learning patience, the hard way. The flight back to Fargo was brief, but every mile felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I reviewed every detail of his upcoming event in my mind: vendors he had chosen without my input, schedules he had ignored, decor he thought was sophisticated. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And I would arrive not to fix it for him, but to shine in a way he couldn't ignore. When I landed, the air in Fargo felt heavier, familiar in its staleness. I drove straight to his venue, a sprawling event hall downtown, and stepped inside. The chaos was immediately apparent. Tables were unevenly spaced, floral arrangements were wilted, the catering team was arguing over menu substitutions, and his fiancée was hovering, trying to keep everything together. Randall himself looked like a man 3 days past his breaking point. "Regina," he said, relief flooding his face. "Thank God you're here. I don't know how—" I raised a finger, cutting him off. "Don't thank me yet, observe first." I walked through the hall, noting every misalignment, every missed detail. I didn't touch anything. I didn't correct a single vendor. I let the disarray speak for itself. The room was a visual testament to his overconfidence, a living reminder of what happened when he excluded me. As the clock ticked closer to the event, I began to step in subtly. Not in the frantic, overbearing way I could have. I let the vendors see me as a guiding presence, a problem solver, a calm eye in the storm. I whispered instructions here, adjusted placements there, suggested menu tweaks, always framing them as my expertise being borrowed, never demanded. The guests began to arrive, and the contrast became undeniable. Where Randall had faltered, I excelled. Where he had caused confusion, I brought clarity. The lighting, the music, the flow of guests, the pacing of the evening, it all fell into place under my careful orchestration. Randall watched from the side, pale and tense, realizing too late how much he had underestimated me. Each compliment the guests offered, each smile, each appreciative nod, was a sting to his pride. At one point, a prominent business client leaned over to Randall and whispered, "Who's running this? The event feels flawless." Randall's eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time, I saw genuine humility there. He couldn't argue, he couldn't take credit, and he couldn't ignore the truth. By the time the evening reached its peak, the champagne toast, the unveiling of the stage, the announcement of the couple's plans, my subtle mastery had turned the chaos into triumph. Guests were raving, vendors were cooperative, and the energy in the room was electric. Randall had been forced to witness it all. After the crowd settled and the formalities were over, Randall approached me, his face flushed with a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and something else. Respect. "Regina, I smiled, calm, composed. "You learned a lot tonight," I said softly. "Maybe next time you'll remember that some people are indispensable." He nodded silently, understanding the weight of my words. I had achieved more than success tonight. I had made him confront his arrogance, recognize my value, and accept the consequences of his exclusion. And I hadn't needed to raise my voice, argue, or fight. I had simply been myself, brilliant, capable, and unapologetic. Later, when I returned to my own space, I allowed myself a quiet laugh. The thrill of this victory wasn't in the embarrassment of others. It was in the power of subtlety, of strategy, and of patience. Randall's realization, his moment of humility, was mine to savor, and it was infinitely sweeter than any confrontation could have been. I reflected on the evening, the way I had orchestrated every detail while letting him see only enough to understand his reliance on me. The truth was simple. Regina Brooks didn't need to demand respect. She earned it. And those who failed to recognize it learned in the hardest, most undeniable ways. As I looked out over the Fargo skyline, the night cool and quiet around me, I felt a profound satisfaction. The showdown wasn't about vengeance, it was about affirmation. I had proven my worth, my talent, and my power, and Randall would carry that lesson with him for a long time. This was not the end, not by a long shot, but it was a turning point. The sister who had once been taken for granted had returned, stronger, more capable, and unafraid to claim her place. Because Regina Brooks didn't just survive betrayal, she orchestrated a comeback, and the world, starting with Randall, would never underestimate her again. The days after the showdown were surreal. Fargo had returned to its quiet rhythm, yet the echoes of my triumph lingered everywhere I went. The corporate launch event cum pre-wedding celebration had been flawless under my guidance, though subtly executed so that Randall could claim partial credit. The truth, however, was obvious to anyone paying attention. The magic had been mine. Every arrangement, every timing adjustment, every crisis averted had flowed from my mind, my planning, and my vision. And Randall? He was a shadow of his former self, humbled, cautious, and acutely aware that he had underestimated me. There was no longer the smug, entitled brother who had flippantly texted me out of his engagement party. That version of him had crumbled in the quiet, precise, unstoppable force that was Regina Brooks. Yet I didn't gloat, not in words, not in obvious gestures. Revenge, after all, was an art. Silent, subtle, and devastatingly effective. I let the world see my success, while he had no choice but to watch and acknowledge it, powerless to intervene. The first sign that my plan had reached full effect came during a family dinner. Randall's fiancée had invited me, hesitantly, citing gratitude and a desire to acknowledge my contribution to the recent event. I arrived in a tailored navy dress, hair sleek, makeup precise. The room fell silent for a moment as eyes shifted toward me. whispers curling through the air like smoke. Randall looked at me nervously, his mouth opening and closing before he found words. Regina, thank you for everything you did. I realize now. I smiled faintly, cutting him off before his apology could fully land. You've realized a lot tonight, I said softly, eyes sweeping across the room. Perhaps too late, but that's not my concern anymore. The subtle sting in my voice was deliberate. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need drama. My presence, my composure, and the knowledge of my past contributions, all that was enough to make my point. After the meal, while guests drifted to their drinks and casual conversations, I found myself talking with the more influential family friends. I listened carefully, shared insights about event planning, and let my charm and intellect shine. Every anecdote, every suggestion, every clever observation reinforced my position. The room slowly recognized that the person they had once overlooked, the sister they assumed would be sidelined, was the one whose skill and vision had saved the night and, in many ways, defined it. Later, in private, Randall pulled me aside. I don't know how to repay you, he admitted, frustration and humility mingling in his voice. I screwed up, and you were incredible. I held up a hand, stopping him. Repayment isn't necessary. Recognition, however, is. My gaze held his for a long moment. The lesson here is simple. Never underestimate people who genuinely care. And never forget that effort, skill, and talent are not measured by presence alone. They're measured by results, and results speak louder than words. He nodded, subdued, finally absorbing the weight of my words. For once, there was no retort, no arrogance, no deflection, just understanding. The following weeks were a blur of success. My Aspen contacts continued to reach out, and now Fargo clients who had once doubted me were seeking my expertise. Invitations for national events arrived, some from New York, some from Chicago, all recognizing the brilliance that had quietly been building in Aspen. The buzz was undeniable. Regina Brooks was a planner who delivered excellence, whether in a small town or among the elite. I took a quiet moment one morning, looking out over Fargo from my office window, snow still lingering in patches across the streets. The city that had once been my playground of ambition now felt different. It was familiar, but I had changed. I was no longer the sister who silently sacrificed for family approval. I was the architect of my own destiny. Randall, meanwhile, had become cautious, his ego tempered, his decisions more thoughtful. He consulted me when appropriate but no longer assumed control or ignored my input. The dynamic had shifted. Respect had replaced entitlement. Recognition had replaced dismissal. And that, I realized, was sweeter than any petty revenge could have been. Then came the final, symbolic moment of triumph. The City Council of Fargo announced a charity gala to raise funds for local schools, and they specifically requested my expertise. This was the type of event I had dreamed of. A large, high-profile gathering that would cement my reputation publicly. I accepted immediately, knowing that the whispers of my Aspen accomplishments had already preceded me. The night of the gala, the ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Floral arrangements reflected the soft golden glow of candlelight, and every detail exuded elegance and precision. Guests arrived in awe, praising the seamless organization and beauty of the event. Photographers documented every moment, social media buzzed with photos, and journalists from regional publications were in attendance. Randall was present as a guest, quietly observing from the side. He watched as I directed the staff, coordinated schedules, and handled last-minute hiccups with effortless grace. The pride he had once taken for granted, my presence, my energy, my skill, was now entirely in my hands. He understood in every glance, every compliment I received, that he had lost his chance to claim the glory that was mine by right all along. As the evening wound down, I stepped onto the balcony, looking out over the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long. Betrayal, exile, strategy, triumph. And now, the culmination of years of effort, talent, and patience had come full circle. Regina Brooks didn't just survive betrayal, she transformed it into opportunity. She turned exclusion into influence, doubt into recognition, and disrespect into reverence. The sister who had been sidelined, the planner who had been ignored, was now untouchable, respected, and unstoppable. And as I watched the final guests leave, the city buzzing with admiration for the event I had orchestrated, I smiled. Randall's lesson had been learned, my worth had been proven, and my future, brilliant, expansive, and entirely mine, stretched out before me, waiting to be conquered. Because Regina Brooks didn't just reclaim her place, she claimed her destiny. The sweet taste of revenge had never been so satisfying.